Hey everyone, and welcome back to Daily Tuition. In this tutorial, we're going to learn about a very impressive React library called React Query. Many times, fetching server data in the React application is a demanding task. Earlier, to access the backend data, we use a fetch function in the use effect hook of React. So anytime a new data comes in, React updates the UI component because React application do not comes with an opinionated way of fetching or updating data from your components. So developer end up building their own ways of fetching data. So this usually means you pass backend data to the React state. We know that how to manage React states, or you can say client states. But what about the server state? So to manage server state, we have a React Query library. React Query library makes fetching, caching, synchronizing, and updating server state in your React application. So it will do all the heavy lifting for you, so you don't have to worry about the server. So let's take a look at a very simple example to understand how to use React Query in the React application. I'm going to open my Visual Studio Code, and here you can notice I have here two projects. First is the JSON server, and second is the React Query application. In the JSON server, you can notice here I have here a file called db.json where I'm going to have all the data of this application. I'm going to just simply make the JSON file inside this JSON server and make a mimic of backend, so I can easily mimic a backend server. I already have a dedicated video on JSON server. Once we have the backend of this application, let's back to the front end. I have here a file called React Query app, and inside this, I have a simple React application here. Inside this React application, I just linked the Tailwind CSS and added a few components here. You can notice inside my app, here I'm going to just get rid of all the default code from the app component and added here two custom components, which is create user and a simple users. I'm going to create both these components inside the component folder right here. You can notice here I have create user and users component. Just for now, let me show you what do we have inside this index.js. You can see inside this index.js, I don't have anything special. We have this default code inside this index file. So I'm going to just leave this index file as it is. If I back to the components, here I have two components, create user and the user component. Inside this helper.js, we're going to add the helper functions. I'm going to leave this helper file as it is and open the users component. Right here, I'm going to simply create a React functional component, and inside that, here I'm going to have a division tag and I'm going to export the user component. And just down here, you can notice I have this user component over here. This user component takes the property called data. When I call this user component, I'm going to iterate this component using map function. Inside this user component, here you can notice I have a simple JSX code. So we just specify some data ID to the division tag, callback function. Here I have onClick event, which is empty right now. And then I'm going to specify the image URI, the h1 flag, which is the status. Then I'm going to just print the name and the email of the user. And at the end, I'm going to print a very simple delete button when we hover on the user data. So now this is a very simple React application we have here. You can download this complete React Query app from the link provided in the description. Now once you clone this project, let's understand how we can fetch the data and create the server state. As you know, to create a client state, or you can say a React state, you use a use state hook. But let's understand how we can make the server state. So we install a library called React Query. So I'm going to just start my server first. You can see inside my server, I'm going to have here React Query, the title, and two input text boxes. If you back to the project, inside this app.css, I have some Tailwind code here. I already added some styling to this project, so you don't have to worry about anything. And now once you have your project, open a new tab and search here React Query. When you search for it, just click on this first React Query website. This will open the React Query website, and just click on this get started. You have to just click on this installation and install this React Query in your React application. You also have an option with CDN, but right now we are using React Query npm option. So I'm going to open my terminal, enter into the React application, and then I'm going to say here npm I for install, and then I'm going to install a library called React Query. When I press enter, this will install this library in this project. I already have this library. If you open this package.json, you can notice here we already have this library over here. So you don't have to install this library in your project. So when you clone this project, make sure you execute a command npm install. So this command will install all these libraries in your project. Once you've done that, just start the application using npm start command. So I'm going to just open the user component, and here at the top, I'm going to first import the React query library. So I'm going to say here import from single quote, and then I'm going to specify React query. And from this library, you have to import use query hook just down here inside your component. Here you have to call this hook. So you have to say here use query. In the parentheses, you need to specify the key, or you can say the tag name for your data. This tag name is useful for prefetching the data from the database. So for example, let's suppose if I specify here a tag name users, you can specify any name here, that's upon you. And then we need to specify here a callback function. So as you can see, I already started the JSON server. To start the JSON server, as you can see, I already execute a command JSON server watch on port 8080. I already started the JSON server. If I open my second bash, here you can notice I can get all the resources on this URL. So I'm going to copy this URL, close this terminal, back to the helper.js file. And at the top here, I'm going to simply say export constant get users is equal to, and then we call here async function. So I'm going to say async, and then I'm going to say constant data is equal to await, and then we call a fetch function. So as you know, we are making a request on HTTP localhost 8080. When you make a request to the user, this is going to return all the data from the db.json file right from here. Just out of that, here I'm going to pass colon, and then I'm going to say return data.json. So we get all this data as JSON format. Let me save this back to the users. At the top, make sure you first import ./helper.js file, and from helper we need to get this function get user like this, and then we pass this get user over here to this use query hook, something like this. Now this hook is going to return multiple properties, and you're going to get that properties in the variables. As you know, in Redux, to create a client-side state, there is a central store from where the Redux is going to pass the data to all the components of React. The same way the React query works. It's going to create a simple central store and pass the central data to all the React components. It's going to create a central store for server. So let's first back to the index.js and create a client for this client application. Now if you back to the project and open the console, you're going to get an error message. No query set or use client provider to set 1. It means you have to create a wrapper around your app and provide a use client provider as a component and pass your current client. So inside this index.js right here, I'm going to import some React query functions. So I'm going to first say import from React query, and from React query, I'm going to import query client, and then I'm going to import the query client provider. Keep in mind, this is a component. So I'm going to just grab this component, query client provider, and then we pass here that component, something like this, instead of this React strict mode. And to this provider, we provide a new query client. So let's create a new constant instance of a new client. So I'm going to say here query client is equal to new query client. So we pass here a new client to this variable, and then we pass this query client to this provider. So we pass here client, and in this curly braces we pass this query client. Oops, I think I misspelled this spelling, query client, something like this. That's it. Let me save these changes. Back to the application, and as you can see, I don't have any errors inside this console. And now if I back to the users, if I put this function inside a console.log like this, save this file, when I reload the browser, you can see I have here two objects. One with the status loading and second with the status success. Let's look at both these objects. Here you can notice you have a bunch of properties. In the first object, when the status is loading, you have the data undefined. But when the status is success, you have your data inside this data property. You can notice here. So now when you have the success status, you successfully get your data from the backend. You can use this variable to render your component. So I'm going to say here constant. In the object, I'm going to say status. Then I'm going to call data. And then I'm going to call is fetching. From this hook, I'm going to get all these three properties. And just after that, I can simply say here inside this user component, I'm going to get rid of this user component. And I'm going to pass here curly braces. And here I can say is fetching. If it is true, then execute a division tag. And I'm going to specify here background updating, or I'm going to return nothing. If this is fetching is true, I'm going to render this background updating message, or I'm going to return nothing. And let's do the same thing for is success, or I can say for the status. If you want, you can call is success here as well, but I'm using here status. So I'm going to just say here status, if it is equal to success. If it is equal to success, then I'm going to call here data dot map function. As you know, inside this data, we have the array of object. You can see we have the array of objects. I'm going to iterate over this array of object and pass these property values to the UI. So inside this map right here, I'm going to call two parameters, v for value, I for index, and then I'm going to return that, and I'm going to return this component from this function. So right here, I'm going to call this component like this, and to this component, we need to pass a unique key. So we pass here key and pass the index value of this object, and then after that, I'm going to pass here a data for this property. So I'm going to say here data equal to, and in the curly braces, I'm going to simply pass this value. Now just after that, if this is not true, then we need to pass the false value as well. So after this component, I'm going to return nothing. So I'm going to pass here empty bracket. Let me save this and reload it. You can see I'm going to get my data. When I hover on this data, I can get my delete button. You can notice here. So you can notice how easy it is to get the data from the database. Now just after that, once you understand how you can fetch the data, let me show you how you can make a data. Now we just understand how to make a GET request using React query. Let's take a look at how to make a POST request. I'm going to back to the create user component. Here I'm going to have a form. So at the top, let me show you how you can use React query to make a POST request. At the top here, I'm going to say import. In this object, I'm going to pass use mutation from React query. I'm going to call here a function, or you can say a hook use mutation. And I'm going to use this use mutation to make a POST request using React query. Let me show you how to do it. I'm going to add here a constant variable, constant add mutation is equal to, and I'm going to call here use mutation hook. To this use mutation, you have to pass your callback function. Instead of passing your tag name here, you directly have to specify your callback function. So let's create a callback function inside this helper.js file. I'm going to just create a simple post request. I'm going to see here export constant create user is equal to, I'm going to pass here async function like this, and we pass here posted data. So we pass here post data. So when we call this create user, we pass the posted data here, and then right here I'm going to say if we don't have any post data, then I'm going to return promise dot reject, and inside this I'm going to simply return post data is not provided. I'm going to just return a simple error message with this function. After that, if we have this data, then I'm going to say constant data is equal to await, and then I'm going to call the fetch function. And inside this, as you know, I'm going to pass this URL, this one. And then as a second parameter right here, we need to pass method. Now, as you know, when you make a default request, fetch is going to consider that request as GET request. Now, we are making post request. So we need to first pass method, which is a type of post. So we pass here method post. Then we need to pass header as well. So I'm going to say here headers. So we pass here content type, which is going to be the application JSON. So the type of data we are passing is JSON. And then inside this object, make sure you pass your data as well to the body. So we pass here body JSON dot stringify, and inside this we pass this post data. And at the end, just out of this fetch, I'm going to return data dot JSON as a response from this create user function. Let me save this back to the create user, and I'm going to pass this function to this use mutation. So let me first import that. I'm going to say here import create user from helper.js file, and I'm going to pass this create user right here. Now just out of that, once you've done that, as you can see here, I'm using here a React hook form to get the data from this form, and this form is going to return a data inside this function on submit as a parameter. So inside this data variable, we have the data of this form. So inside this, I'm going to call this add mutation. Using this add mutation instance, we make a post request. And inside this on submit, here I'm going to say if we have data, if we pass data to this form, I'm going to execute this if statement, and right here I'm going to say await add mutation, this variable dot mutate. You have to call a function mutate, and then you need to pass your data to it. So we pass here this data variable, this one. That's it. This is going to make a post request and pass your data to this helper function. Just out of that, here I'm going to simply say console.log. Yeah, and right here I'm going to say data created successfully. And then I'm going to say reset field name and reset field email. So I'm going to reset the value of the input text boxes using this reset field function of use form. Now keep in mind, when you make a get request, you call use query hook, and when you make post put patch or delete post request, you call use mutation hook. So if you just back to the create user, you can notice this is a type of post request. Oops, I think I misspelled. Right here we need to close this object, something like this. Let me save this. And now let me make a post request and create this data. So I'm going to just back to my project, and if I pass here daily tuition@gmail.com, when I click on this create, you can see I'm going to have here data created successfully. If I back to the db.json right down here, you can see I'm going to have a new ID 7 with name daily and with the new email. I already passed this default data from this form, so don't worry about that. So this statement is going to create a new data inside a database. Now let me show you magic. Now you might say you can do the same thing without React Query library. Definitely you can do that. But let me show you a magic of using React Query. If I back to my project, you can notice when I scroll down, I have my updated data over here. You can see React Query will automatically refetch the data and display that in the application. Now what I want, when I click on this create button, I want to update this data automatically. Instead of making a new request, I'm going to update the data whenever I click on this submit button. We can easily do that with this React Query. As you can notice, inside these users, we have a tag here, users. I'm going to use this tag and make a post request. And when we update the data of users, I'm going to refetch the data from the server and update the UI. To do that, from this query, right from this React Query, I'm going to call a new hook, which is use query client. And I'm going to call this right here. I'm going to say constant query client is equal to use query client, something like this. And then to this use mutation, as a second parameter, we pass an object. Inside this object, I'm going to get different properties. So let's access one of them. I'm going to say here on success. So when the request is successful, this is going to execute a callback function. So we pass here a callback function, something like this. And inside this callback function, I'm going to say query client, this query client dot invalidate queries. And inside this, we pass this query tag, this one, users. What this does is, when we make a post request and on success, we are going to just update this user collection. So when we make a post request to the user and add a new user, I'm going to update the user collection. Back to my project, reload it, and let me pass new data here. I'm going to say react query @gmail.com. When I click on this create button, you can see when I scroll down, I'm going to get a new data over here. React query will automatically update this complete data. You don't have to do anything else. Let's do the same thing with this delete button. Let me show you how this delete button works. Back to my application, and inside this user, you can see we have here on click button. When we click on this delete button, I want to delete this current object, or I can say this user. So let's create the handler function inside this parent component right here. I'm going to say here async function handler click, and then I'm going to pass here event parameter like this. And if I console.log event.target.dataset.id, then I'm going to get this ID in the console. Let me show you. Let me save these changes, copy this handle click, pass that to this user so I can access this. So I'm going to pass here handle click is equal to, I'm going to pass this handle click function here, and to this data we need to pass a property called handle click, and then I'm going to pass this to this on click. Now let me save these changes. This will remove this warning right from here, and now when I click on this button, this is going to return the current ID of the user. You can see. Now when I have the ID, I can make a delete request. So let's see how to do it. Now once you understand how you can get and make a post request using React query, let me show you how you can delete this data. So I'm going to just back to the user.jsx file. Right here, when I click on this button, it will just console.log the ID of the user. So I'm going to get this ID and pass that to the delete HTTP request. So in the helper.js, let's create a new function for delete request. So I'm going to say here export constant delete user is equal to async user ID. We get the ID from the user, so I'm going to pass here a parameter user ID, and then I'm going to say if we don't have user ID, then return a promise.reject, and then I'm going to say here user ID is not provided. After that, if we have the user ID, then I'm going to say here constant data is equal to await fetch. Inside this fetch, we need to pass this URI, something like this, and then after this user, we need to pass the ID which I want to delete. I'm going to pass /, pass here $, in the curly braces, I'm going to pass this user ID, this one. And then as a second argument, we need to specify the method. So in the object, I'm going to say method, which is, as you know, delete. And then I'm going to say return this data. Back to the users right here, as you know, we need to import a React query. Here I'm going to say import React query, and right from this React query, I want to import use mutation and use query client. I'm using this use query client to refetch the data from the database. Now if we back to the user, you can notice I already have here React query. Let me just cut this and pass that here. I also need to import this delete user right over here, and then just out of that, just out of this constant variable right down here, I'm going to say constant query client is equal to use query client, and then I'm going to say constant delete mutation is equal to use mutation. As I said, to make post, delete, batch, and put HTTP request, we are using use mutation hook. So we call here use mutation and we pass here delete user as the first parameter, and as a second parameter we pass here an object. Inside this object I have on success, and to this on success property we need to pass in a callback function, and I'm going to return the query client, this query client variable dot invalidate queries. And inside this, as you know, we need to update this collection, user collection. So we pass here users. Let me just copy this delete mutation. When we click on this delete button, I'm going to call this handle click function, this one. And inside this, I'm going to say if we have e.target.dataset.id, then I'm going to execute this if statement, and then I'm going to say await delete mutation dot mutate, and inside this we need to pass id. So I'm going to copy this, pass that here, and just down here I'm going to say console.log data deleted successfully. That's it. And now let me delete both these objects. If I delete this last object, or you can say this last user, I'm going to just click on this delete button. You can see the data is now deleted, and I'm going to get here a message, data deleted successfully. So you can see the React query is automatically going to update the UI whenever we click on this delete button. Let me do the same for this user. So let's suppose I want to delete this first user. I'm going to click on this delete button. You can see the first user is now deleted from this database. The React query will do all the heavy lifting for you. You don't have to worry anything. Now I have a simple exercise for you. You have to make the update request using React query on this same application. That's it. I hope you understand how you can work with React query using React application. Now, if you want me to make a dedicated video on React query, then let me know in the comment section. If you find anything useful, make sure to press the like button, share this video with your friends, subscribe for more latest videos. That is all for now. I will see you in the next one.